So good afternoon again then. Now, freedom fighters who were incarcerated during the apartheid year remember all too well the harsh reality that it was. Now, experiencing a curtailment of freedoms that were hard-won brings on the reflection of that harsh past, but also an understanding of why this is so necessary. Now, Lerato Fekisi spoke to Ronald Neerkaart, who was incarcerated in the 80s for his activism against apartheid. All right, we'll get to that story hopefully as soon as possible. Now, we are, of course, awaiting President Cyril Ramaphosa to give us his Freedom Day address. We did earlier on hear from the EFF and their address. More than 200 Cubans, of course, expected as well to have given South Africa some sort of help. So perhaps more word on that, more word on just trying to give South Africa a sense of understanding as to where we currently sit. As I said, that Freedom Day address, really, really critical and important. Let's cross now to Samkele Maseko in Johannesburg as we get a reflection and perhaps some sense of what is perhaps to come. Samkele, still a delay, unfortunately, from President Cyril Ramaphosa. Any word on why?
It's not yet clear why the President Arabile has delayed the start of his address to the nation when it comes to Freedom Day, but we do know and do understand that the President is ironing out some nitty-gritties within his speech and ironing out his speech and also preparing himself and going through that particular speech that he will deliver to the nation. We do know that the President, if he's going to address the nation, he does have that 15-20 minutes before his address to go through the auto cue to practice his speech so that when he addresses the nation, he does not have any flaps when he addresses the nation and that he speaks eloquently and fluently. So these are some of the issues that are currently going on within this presidential address that is expected of President Cyril Ramaphosa to commemorate 26 years on Freedom Day today and illustrate the South African theme for this year's Freedom Day, which is solidarity, particularly expressed by the relations of South Africa and Cuba, and noting that over 200 Cuban doctors have landed on our shores in the early hours of this morning at Waterkloof Air Base in Pretoria which were received by Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, and the Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Blade Nzimande. So the theme for this year is solidarity, particularly around the world and the globe at large. And in South Africa, in particular, is fighting this invisible enemy, which is COVID-19, the coronavirus, which is ravaging society and disrupting the norm of living.
The question just becomes, I suppose, in a time like this, whether enough has sort of been said across the country with regards to making people aware, getting through to those rural areas. Does the president hope that even, do you get a sense that the president is hoping that even this address will again appeal to all those who perhaps aren't adhering to things like social distancing, despite knowing that, yes, it's Freedom Day. And even though our freedoms may be hindered ever so slightly today, that we are still free as a country and we need to do this in order to be able to celebrate Freedom Day again.
Well, Arabile, the issue of disseminating the message of the COVID-19 to particularly rural communities has been a very contentious one within the governance sphere. For instance, if you look at the posture of the minister in the presidency, Jackson Mthembu, when it comes to South Africans echoing out their opinions and voicing them out and speaking to government on the various restrictions, coming up with their own proposals and giving government feedback, which there was a deadline for 12 noon today, which has now passed. That deadline has now closed for South Africans to communicate their various voices when it comes to the regulations and the restrictions of the stage 4 of the lockdown that has since passed. Many South Africans questioning why the government would opt to speak about this message on Twitter and for South Africans to send their various opinions via email, as many of South Africans, particularly within the rural communities, don't have access to emails, computers, and technological advances within this country. So these are some of the issues that are being debated, and that the magnitudes of the people whom this virus will ultimately impact, and that the South African government is afraid that should this virus go to the rural areas, for instance, you go to the Eastern Cape and with those South Africans who attended that funeral there, and 40 of them having left that particular funeral infected and affected by this particular pandemic. Provinces such as the Eastern Cape, their own Premier Oscar Mabuyane has come out and said that they are afraid that if this virus was to spread, particularly within the rural communities, it would be game over, and it would be very hard for the South African government to contain the pandemic there, and you would have magnitudes of deaths within that aspect aspect. The same goes to rural provinces such as Limpopo, the Northwest, the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, that have also expressed an opinion when it comes to this issue, and a little province such as Mpumalanga as well, which has less than 30 infections of this particular pandemic, has also expressed that they are working hard to curb this pandemic from going to the rural communities. But another constituency which is largely affected, Arabile, by this particular COVID-19 pandemic is the squatter camps, the informal settlements, which the government has moved swiftly in trying to disinfect these particular communities, and also to build some sort of homes and infrastructure for them to have some sort of a livelihood during this course of this scourge that is ravaging South Africans and the world at large.
Yeah. Samkele, the Premier of the KwaZulu-Natal province has said that, there is a chance that KZN would remain under level 5 lockdown beyond this coming Thursday. Are you getting any word perhaps with regards to Gauteng and the Western Cape? I mean, both those provinces have far more cases than KwaZulu-Natal alone. Are you getting perhaps a sense? Is the president perhaps, do you think, going to give some word with regards to whether that should be a sentiment shared for the rest of the nation?
Well, Arabile, that's somewhat of a quagmire for the South African government. For instance, if you were to look at the last presidential address of President Cyril Ramaphosa to the nation, he did highlight that some parts of the country would remain at stage 5 load shedding, and that would be rationalized across the country depending on how that particular city or metro, if it's the epicenter of that particular of the COVID-19 pandemic in that particular province, then the provincial command council of that province has the necessary jurisdiction to keep that particular area at stage 5 of the lockdown. For instance, if you look at the Adhering metro as an example, that particular district, the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihlezi Galala, and the MEC of Health, Nomakuku Semelani Zulu, have said that they will be particularly enforcing law enforcement officers within that district. They will be bringing on more troops of the SANDF within that particular metro. Then you come to the address of President Cyril Ramaphosa. He named about 5 metro municipalities. He went to Buffalo City, he went to Johannesburg, he went to Ekurhuleni, he went to Tshwane, he went to the city of Cape Town, and he, last and foremost, went to the Ethekwini Metro Municipality, in saying that metro municipalities are the risk of this particular COVID-19 due to the factor that they are highly condensed metropolises within this country. Also looked that for Johannesburg, and as example, which we are seeing the backdrop of where we are right now, this is the economic hub of the country, the city of gold, and it would be largely difficult to contain stage 5 load shedding in this particular city, on the virtue that if you are opening up the economy, as you as an economic and business anchor and reporter would know, that if you are opening up the economy, you would then be loosening up people to go and frequently be on the streets as they are commuting to and from work.
Yeah, Samkele, appreciate that, but of course the levels now are just as confusing, a whole lot of load shedding in what you said, but of course we understand quite well that it certainly isn't with regards to load shedding, but certainly the levels for the COVID-19 restrictions here locally. So that address, very, very critical. Thank you so much for that. Samkele Maseko out in Johannesburg. Then as we await President Cyril Ramaphosa's address as well this afternoon. So it does get really, really interesting as to what he will say then, what exactly he offers South Africa as we continue to try and find a way to move the country forward. Open up as much as possible, but ensure the safety of millions of South Africans, of course, very, very critical. Now, more than 2